Well, historically speaking, so we're actually the oldest law enforcement agency in our nation's history. Ben Franklin hired the first postal surveyor in 1775. And why? Because we're starting as a colony. The way that that our gold was transferred back and forth, and that our communication was transferred back and forth, and this preparation for what was going to eventually happen in our independence was through the post. And so he decided he needed to have some agents to make sure there's some integrity there. So they were first called postal surveyors, and those guys were basically on the stagecoach to protect all the stuff that was going on. But then when somebody was doing something with that or attacking that system, they had to have somebody investigate it. So that's the birth of the postal inspector. Okay.
Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, my name is Darin Solmon. I'm a United States Postal Inspector, retired.
Retired Postal Inspector. Well, this is great because I have not had any postal inspectors on the channel yet, so we're going to figure out what you guys do. So can you tell me, give me a little bit of background on yourself, growing up?
Well, I'm an Idaho native.
Okay.
I was born in Twin Falls, Idaho, and raised in Burley, Idaho. Small farming community. Just basic kid, involved in school and sports, baseball player, wrestled, a little soccer, some football. In high school, I was in student council. I was the mascot of the school, so I was the Burley Bobcat. So I was on the cheer squad, so all good things there, as you can imagine. And no, I just your basic Southern Idaho kid, a lot of my friends were farmers in agriculture. My dad happened to be a real estate broker and insurance guy in town. Pretty well-known guy. Everywhere I'd go, they kind of knew my family and who we were. We weren't the rich guys on the hill, but just a family that kind of everybody was aware of, and I had a good upbringing there in Southern Idaho. Yeah.
Good student.
Good student. 3.89, I think. 20th in my class. Then I went to Boise State for my education. And yeah, did well there. Yeah, as well.
Was there anything as you were growing up, Darin, that drew you to law enforcement?
So I guess kind of going back, my family has a long tradition of service. My dad has, of course, my grandfather and his three brothers were all served in World War II in each specific branch. And, Navy, the Army Air Corps, Marine Corps, and the Army. One of each. And my grandmother, who's married to my grandfather, she actually worked for the police department in Burley. So when it was a Burley Police Department, it's the sheriff's office kind of does the law enforcement duties there. But she was kind of like the dispatcher / office gal / meter maid. And so she wasn't sworn, but she did wear a badge, and she did issue citations, and she did a lot of the things that the patrol officers wouldn't, or, a lot of the administrative things. But, it was nice when she passed away, they actually gave her a law enforcement burial, and
nice.
It was cool. Yeah, so I had that kind of feeling. My dad was a volunteer fireman in town, so when there was a fire, he carried a pager, and it's not what he did, obviously, for a career, but he'd carry a pager, and so the full-time guys could go out and fight fire. He would go in and run the radios at the station. So I grew up with him having this pager on his hip and beep, 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 hey, got to leave dinner, got to leave the movie, got to leave the ball game, and Dad would go serve. And then he was also in the 60s. He was a reserve officer with the police department, and he kind of told me stories about that. So I guess it's kind of in the blood.
So nothing specific that happened. It's just kind of in the blood.
No, nothing. Just I always had this desire to serve. I joined the Cub Scouts when I was younger. I didn't go through the whole program, but I just always thought it was somebody who would actually, quote unquote, put on the uniform and go out and serve others, strangers that they didn't know. I just thought that was a very appealing way to kind of live your life. I was never drawn to anything else. I never thought I wanted to be, like an attorney or a banker or, specifically into business. I always felt like law enforcement or something like that would be more up my alley. And being in athletics, I always thought being physically fit and being, wise with your health and stuff was, conducive to that type of career.
So before we get into your law enforcement career, let's talk a little bit about your education. So at BSU, what was your degree in?
I got a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice Administration, and I graduated in 1996 with that. Prior to that, I had served a mission in Argentina, LDS mission. So I got a lot of worldly experience there about, different ideas about different cultures and stuff. And obviously the work that we do as missionaries is rewarding and as far as service is concerned. And when I came back to college, I think that experience helped me focus a little more on, I really want to do something service oriented. So I continued to study and get my criminal justice degree at Boise State.
So, but in 2000, this is what I find interesting. In 2000, you got a master in forensic sciences. What is that, and why did you get a master's in that?
Okay, so a master of forensic science is basically the study of forensic sciences is how science applies to the law and to the courts. So you're talking about, you have all kinds of things. You have studies of abnormal psychology, biology, physiology, pathology, all those ologies that are out there, as far as, and also investigative techniques, crime scene analysis, and all the things that forensic techs would do. The reason I went through it is I was at the Border Patrol at the time, and through the Benevolence Association of the Border Patrol, they had basically co-partnered or whatever with National University in La Jolla, and in an effort to kind of further the education of their agents. So basically it came down to, hey, you can get this degree in forensic science and we'll pay for it. We'll help you pay for it, So as long as we got a certain grade, and got through our studies, the Border Patrol would help supplement with that.
But why a master? Why forensic sciences? Could you have gotten a master's in something else?
I guess I could have, but I knew that eventually I wanted to get into investigations, right? Early on in my endeavors to start my career, I'd applied for police officer jobs in Idaho. I was actually on my way to the chief's interview for Twin Falls Police Department when the Border Patrol called. I had applied for them a year and a half earlier and didn't hear anything. And I'd already graduated from college and I needed to make some money. I needed to get my career started. So, Twin Falls was close to home, close to Burley, where a lot of my family was. And I thought that'd be a great agency to work for. And literally the week I was supposed to go have the chief's interview, they're going to hire two, and there were three candidates. So the chief was going to interview and take the first two. The Border Patrol called, and I accepted that offer. And so why? I think it's because I thought, having worked 4 years in the Border Patrol and deciding I didn't want to be in the Border Patrol forever, I really wanted to do more investigative stuff. I'd applied to the FBI, DEA I was looking into, ATF, and then I'd applied at the Postal Inspection Service. I took the FBI exam.
Before you go on, let me ask you some questions. So
yeah.
you start with Border Patrol in '97. Prior to that, is this just a shotgun approach where you're sending out applications to people that you're interested in?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you do. Like when I didn't know a lot about the Postal Inspection Service, to be honest, when I was in college. Mm-hmm. I remember a postal inspector who ultimately ended up being my partner, Rod Herr, coming to one of our classes and talking about it. But I just didn't really, I guess I didn't quite understand what the agency was. Everything was like, everyone wants to be an FBI agent, right? But I knew, being young and not without a lot of experience, I was probably going to have to go be a patrol officer or detective somewhere. That's kind of how people move up the ranks. And so I guess that's kind of where it was. And I knew that getting an education in forensics would probably help in the hiring process or the recruiting process.
Okay, so just real briefly, in '97, you start with Border Patrol, because I'm assuming they're the first ones that call you.
They're the first ones that call. Yep.
Okay, and so how old are you at that point?
I'm 25.
25. What are your day-to-day responsibilities when you get hired with Border Patrol?
Well, obviously, first of all, we had to go to the academy for 20 weeks, and that was it's in Charleston, South Carolina at that point. It was during Operation Gatekeeper, and the Clinton administration had thrown a lot of money at Border Patrol to hire a lot of agents, so there are just tons of classes going through. And so my day-to-day was obviously going through that. But once I get to San Diego, it's Border Patrol work, and you're the new guy, so you're working midnights, it's like 11 p to 9 a, and you're going out with your field training guys and your unit, and then eventually on your own, just working sensors. I was in San Diego, and it was called the Brownfield Station. which is basically has the east side of the Otay Mesa Port of Entry all the way over to, well, there's El Cajon area, basically, if people are familiar with that area, and it's still very mountainous in that area. So we were kind of a mountain goat crew where we'd go up and sit up in the hills and wait for sensors to go off, or, you know, try to, by the time the aliens get to us up on the hill, they've been in for probably a day or two. And so we're kind of doing a lot of interior style enforcement at the border.
Okay. So you're just trying to catch these guys kind of through the Badlands area.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, exactly. So we're not, I mean, we had some what they call an X. We had some stagnant positions where you would just sit there for a shift and basically watch a section of the fence. And you never wanted to work that. It's really boring. It's tedious, but somebody has to be there. It's when you could go out and do some roving patrols, and basically drop down and lay in and wait for groups to come up and apprehend them. And, you know, it's really cool. It's like hiking in the middle of the night, but you're doing it every day. And quite frankly, it gets very tiring. So
so one of my other interviews I did was a two-parter with a guy that was with Border Patrol, and they were on a specialized unit, and this was in the 80s, and they were just tracking the bad guys.
Yeah,
that were
that's probably the anti-smuggling unit.
Yeah. Did they still have that when you were going on?
They call them ASU, anti-smuggling unit, and they were basically plainclothes agents. A lot of them look pretty scary, some of them, because they're trying to, you know, look like they live at the border, right? Yeah. The border is a very interesting place. A lot of crime, a lot of deviance. It's kind of a no man's land, and anybody who's lived down there or worked there will go ahead and tell you that. And so there was a bandit unit that they had down there.
Yeah, that's exactly
talking about
that's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, there's a book called, I think it's called Lines and Shadows, that talks a lot about that, the bandit unit. And some of my supervisors were actually on that unit in the 80s, and one of them even has a bullet hole in his rear end from a firefight. So yeah. Wow. Yeah, so yeah, they still had that unit there when I was there. Any
close calls while you were doing any patrols out there?
Close calls, you always have that moment of, oh no, you know, right? Because you patrol alone on a unit, but it's not like two-man cars. So if you're going down to a group by yourself, it can be a little sketchy, especially at night. I guess most of the time, the aliens, when you would apprehend them, they would comply, and detention wasn't too hard. But if he was like the coyote, the guide, they didn't want to get apprehended, because they know if they're registered as a guide and they get arrested, right, you know, then it could be a formal deportation or prison, and those guys would typically just abandon the group and run back south or go away. And but then you have, so in our area, I don't think we had a lot of drug smuggling, because it's not flat desert terrain, it's mountains, so you'd have to pack lots of drugs through. It was mostly aliens and, you know, and people sneaking across the border. Most of the time it's people moving north, migrants trying to, you know, better their lives, go to work. But you'd find some bad actors sometimes. They'd have the tattoos, and we would run them and find out that Grupo Beta, which is a Mexican group down south of the border, wanted them. So they're fleeing north to get away from those guys. And we do a lot of, like, basically prisoner returns to those guys. And who knows what happens when they go south? You know, you're kind of like, whatever. But, you know, it is what it is. And as far as close calls, like, I did chase a guy one time in the middle of the night, the scope unit. So we had these guys in infrared scope trucks, and he was probably half a mile away from me on another hill, but he could see. They had busted a group earlier in swing shift. I was oncoming, and I was driving up the road, and he hit me on the radio and said, "Unit at the 25, what's your number?" And I'm Bravo 487. He's like, I think the guide of the group that we busted earlier is right below you. So I'm 10-4'd it. I jumped out, and he can see me glowing on the screen. I can't see anything. And what's interesting is in the Border Patrol, a lot of times you can smell the individuals before you can see them, because they've been out there a while, right? Yeah. And I literally knew the guy was down there because I could smell him. And he's like, just keep dropping down. You're right on close. And he'd been out there probably a couple days. And finally, when I got up on him, he had a big stick in his hand, and he was like, "Matame, kill me, you know?" And, you know, I went guns on. I'm like, drop it. And he came at me, and Scope's telling me he can see it. He's like, he's got something in his hands. Be careful. And I was about half trigger pull, you know, and he finally just dropped the stick and put his hands behind his head and kneeled down, and was able to get him. So that was sketch number one. And then sketch number two was probably, I remember rolling in one night well, one morning after being out all night, we would typically check our vehicles for damage and to report it, so the next guy doesn't get in trouble if you're the one running into a rock or something. And I noticed there were some bullet holes in my fender that weren't there when I checked it earlier. So somebody had taken some shots from me, probably from south of the border, as I was moving along, and I probably didn't hear them or whatever, because there's like gravel and stuff.
Yeah. Huh.
So those stories are, a little sketch. Yeah.
97 to 2001, you were with Border Patrol.
Yeah.
And then in 2001, you start with the postal inspectors.
Right.
How does that work? Do you, again, in the middle of you working for Border Patrol, I'm assuming that you have this vision of going to a different agency.
Right. What
are the other agencies, and how do you end up at postal inspectors?
So after a couple of years in the Border Patrol, I realized this isn't the lifelong career that I wanted. I wanted to get into investigations, but by this time I'm getting close to getting my master's degree, and I knew that's just kind of what I wanted to do. So I had applied with the FBI, I'd taken the exam and was waiting to hear. And then a friend of mine told me, hey, the postal inspectors are hiring. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of them. They're like, give it a shot. Now at this point I'm at sector headquarters, and I'm working what they call a recruitment / DARE unit. Or it's not DARE, it's called Pride. It's like a DARE unit. And so we were doing basically a public relations type unit, and every day we're wearing our Class A uniforms and spit shine and polished, and we're going to schools and talking to kids, and we're going to recruitment events trying to hire Border Patrol agents, And one of the agents that was there, she's like, I just applied for the postal inspectors. If you're thinking about doing investigations, I hear they're really good, and I hear they're great. So I started researching them a little bit, as much as I could, and I'm like, they do some pretty cool stuff. So I threw my hat in the ring, and in about 6 months, they're calling me like, hey, you sound like you'd be a good fit, So took the exam and did all the background stuff and the poly, and they need Spanish speakers all the time. And they said, you speak Spanish? I said, yeah. So you go take the Spanish exam. And I got hired, and lo and behold, let's go to San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Okay, so before we get to Puerto Rico, I'm assuming, I just want to talk to just real briefly about Spanish.
Yeah.
I'm assuming because your mission and Border Patrol, you're fluent.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that probably really helps. In terms of the Postal Service, where's their academy?
Okay, so their academy is in Potomac, Maryland.
Okay, and what does it consist of? What are you guys learning at the academy?
Well, it's everything that an FBI agent or a DE agent or ATF or Marshals. It's a FLETC certified academy.
Okay.
But it's in-house. So like instead of Quantico, it's the Postal Inspection Service Academy in Potomac, Maryland. And it's CI school, criminal investigative school. You're learning criminal law. You're learning defensive tactics, arrest techniques, officer survival, firearms. Everything that an FBI agent or any other agent would go through, we had to do and qualify to get, our FLETC approved accreditation as to be federal agents. So the thing about the academy, though, is when I went through, it was suit and tie every day.
Really?
There's no BDUs, there's no polo shirts, except if you're doing PT or defensive tactics or whatever. But every day it was suit and tie, and that got a little arduous for 16 weeks, but.
Now, Darin, I worked with you, and so I know what you guys do. But for the audience who doesn't know, they're going to ask, "What's a postal inspector do? What do you and why do you guys carry a gun? Because you guys are gun-toting inspectors, criminal investigators. So give me a little idea, or tell the audience a little bit of idea about what you guys do, and day to day, right?"
Well, historically speaking, so we're actually the oldest law enforcement agency in our nation's history. Ben Franklin hired the first postal surveyor in 1775. And why? Because we're starting as a colony, the way that that our gold was transferred back and forth, and that our communication was transferred back and forth, and this preparation for what was going to eventually happen in our independence was through the post. And so he decided he needed to have some agents to make sure there's some integrity there. So they were first called postal surveyors. And those guys were basically on the stagecoach to protect all the stuff that was going on. But then when somebody was doing something with that or attacking that system, they had to have somebody investigate it. So that's the birth of the postal inspector. Okay.
Okay.
So now, as we fast forward to 2023, what are the postal inspectors doing every day? Well, we have drugs in the mail, guns in the mail, anything you want to ship from to and fro can go in the mail. And a lot of those things are unlawful. You know, you can't just throw 3 pounds of methamphetamine in the mail you can, but not lawfully, from California and send it to Boise, Idaho. So, for example, I would here, through my investigative techniques and our data analysis and stuff, be able to identify partials or packages that might be full of drugs. Then in that situation, if I identified one, I'd bring in a canine unit, the dog would sniff. We'd get a federal search warrant for that package. State warrant doesn't work because it's the federal mail, so you got to go to the federal magistrate and get all that done through the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's not as easy as you might think. It's not an hour with commercials that you might see on TV in some of these shows. And you open it up, test it. Yeah, it's 3 pounds of methamphetamine. Reseal it, and then inspector would dress up like the letter carrier, for example, and go out and deliver it with the DEA, Homeland Security, state police, local police, whoever's working the case with them. And we do what we call a controlled delivery into a home or to a car or over the counter at a post office, and then hold those folks accountable. So that's why we carry guns, because that can be very sketchy as well, right? So serving warrants. And then our primary job is for the safety and security of the post office, its assets, and its employees. So we'd work, assaults on carriers. Somebody robs a carrier in the street. Somebody commits a homicide, kills a carrier. That happens once in a while. People trying to rob them for whatever they're carrying. Maybe it's a drug package that they want. They know that the carrier's going to go deliver it to Fulano, and they want to intercept it before Fulano gets it. So they take the carrier out. I mean, that's historically has happened. Robberies of the post office used to be a big deal, especially in San Juan. We had a lot of postal robberies down there because they knew that on check day, people would go to the post office to cash their checks, and the post office would have a lot of cash on hand, like a bank. And so we would have to, every Friday, we would sit and wait till 5:30 till the post office was completely closed and couldn't go home because inevitably, probably one of them was going to call and say we just got robbed. And
yeah, it's super interesting because I would have never thought half the stuff that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, postal burglary. Somebody breaks in the post office in the middle of the night, steals a bunch of packages. It's our jurisdiction. So I could be sitting here in Boise, Idaho, and get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning, Pocatello PD, saying, "Hey, somebody broke into your post office." I would mount up and drive to Pocatello and hook up with those guys and try to figure out the whodunit. And sometimes those investigations take a really long time, especially when you have a big loss or an injury or, heaven forbid, a fatality in those types of situations. Fraud investigations, mail fraud statute is one of the biggest hammers. Everybody loves the mail fraud statute. The U.S. Attorney uses it all the time. FBI uses it, DEA, anybody. If you can't get somebody on a drug charge, hit them with a mail fraud charge. It's going to be 10 years in prison anyway. It's a great statute and everybody loves it. IRS uses it all the time.
And when you say mail fraud, give me an example.
Anything fraudulent that you do in the mail, if you purport to sell somebody something that's fraudulent or a fraudulent contract, when these subprime mortgages happened in 2006, 2007, a lot of these fraudulent mortgages were being given to people. They would send the mortgage information through the mails, and they're fraudulent. So we were able, we would hit these guys with a mail fraud charge. So anything, tax guys, if they can't get somebody on a tax evasion, but they purported something fraudulently and it went through the mail, mail fraud charge. It's kind of a catch-all.
Yeah, so like the romance scams, the Nigerian prince, all that stuff.
The Nigerian scams, hey, I want to buy your motorcycle, for $1,000. I'm going to send you $2,000. Go ahead and cash that $2,000. Keep the $1,000 for yourself, and then wire the stuff back to me. And then the check ends up being bad. Yeah, all that. Fakechecks.org was actually one of the websites that we set up for kind of community awareness. And that's one thing about the Postal Inspection Service, because it's tied to the post office. While it's a law enforcement agency, we're also kind of the executive protection and security for the post office. And so there's a lot of interaction, obviously, between the inspectors, the agents, the gun toters, and postal management, whether it comes from Postmaster General down to the Chief Postal Inspector and down through us. I mean, it's just we have our hands in a lot of different things. And some of the other things that we traditionally work were like child exploitation. Before the internet, people who would do nefarious things with children and take pictures and videos or whatever, the only way they would get it from person A to person B would be through the mail, right? And so consequently, we started the child exploitation program, a child pornography program, and did a lot of work with that over the years and continue to do so in our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Forces, the ICACs.
Did I see somewhere that you had mentioned executive protection, or was
executive protection? So the Postmaster General is considered a cabinet position, and I think we figured out they're like number 33 down the line. If the president were to pass away or be assassinated, and you go through the vice president, the speaker, and I think HUD and whatever, the Postmaster General is down there. So they're considered a cabinet position, so they get an executive protection detail. They have one full-time at headquarters, and then when they travel, they have executive protection details throughout the nation. So I would work those when they would come to the Northwest or the Rocky Mountain region. I would go be bodies on with the Postmaster General. Yeah,
that's fascinating. Okay, let's get Darin. Let's get back to your career. So
right.
you graduated out of the academy, and your first assignment is in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Yes, sir.
What are your assignments?
Okay, I was assigned to the violent crimes team. And the violent crimes team there worked mostly assaults on employees, assaults and homicides, and robberies and burglaries. So basically, all the knuckle dragger stuff. You know, it wasn't any white collar. It was just all going out and finding people who are, you know, actually, you know, thwarting the system by force somehow. Yeah. So.
And so San Juan, Puerto Rico, is my understanding, at least, you know, the little bit that I talked to people who work down there, violent, crime-ridden. Is that all true?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, somebody can probably say I'm a little off, but there's probably an average of 400 to 500 homicides on the island every year. And a lot of that is underground drug-related. There's a huge, huge drug trafficking entity down there, and a lot of the violence is because of that. And so consequently, we would work a lot of, our drug guys and violent crimes guys would work things that are associated to the post office in that drug world. Huge underground community. Nobody has any money, but there's Mercedes and BMWs all over the place. Like, where are they getting the money for that? Well, certainly not going on a tax schedule for sure, right?
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of that. And so we had to be, a lot of the places we had to go to apprehend the suspects in our investigations were in like projects, they call them a caserío. And we would go in there, and I remember getting there and they're like, okay, we got to get your vest. I'm like, I have a vest. They're like, no, you need a flak vest that can stop rifle rounds. I'm like, why? Well, when we go into these places, we have potential taking some heavy fire. I'm like, where in the world did you send me? Are we in Beirut? But it was just how it was. And a lot of times also, if you look back, there was a lot of corruption in the local police forces as well. So you didn't know really sometimes if you could trust so-and-so with the police department, because sometimes they would be working with the bad guys, and a lot of bribery, a lot of infiltration, a lot of corruption that way. So it was kind of like, and it wasn't just, that's not unique to this Postal Inspection Service. The FBI dealt with that, the DEA, the customs guys. We all had to deal with, okay, keep your friends close and your enemies closer type of situation. So you had to stay on your game and be very cognizant of what you're doing.
Before I forget to ask, how big is the Postal Inspector Service? How many?
US Postal Inspection Service is about 1,300 sworn, I think now, gun toters. I think that's the complement. It's very small.
Yeah, so I was going to say very small. So that means
we're the oldest and probably one of the smallest agencies out there.
But traditionally, if you're that small, that means you are working with state, local, and feds all the time.
100%. I couldn't have done my job. There were only, when I first got here to Idaho, after being in Puerto Rico, there was one inspector and I was his second. And there had been one inspector for the whole state of Idaho, all the way up to Riggins. Spokane office takes Riggins north into the Panhandle, but that means everything south of Riggins, in the metro area, Boise, eastern Idaho, and all that, is the Boise office's responsibility. And so that was Rod Herr, and then when I came down, I was Rod's second. Yeah.
So I would assume, based on as small as your agency was or is,
Mm-hmm.
you are as busy as you want to be.
Yep.
And can you pick and choose the things you work on?
Yeah. So having worked with other agencies, I understand that, because of the size of the agencies and the integrity that they need to keep, they assign their agents a lot of duties, right? But here, especially in what we call the miscellaneous assignment in Boise, we basically decided what we were going to do and basically prioritize based on what we could handle. Obviously, the big boss, the inspector in charge, he's in Seattle. And then typically our team leader or our first line supervisor was in Spokane. But for the most part, once they realize, hey, you're competent, we can let this guy go to work, they're pretty much hands off. So I would get up in the morning and schedule, okay, today I got this meeting for this, and we're going to get a search warrant. And so Thursday I'm going to do this. And it wasn't like, hey, can I? Hey, can I? It was just basically go do good work. And that comes through the training, because by the time you get to be a postal inspector, I mean, there's a lot of things you have to go through to do it, like every other agency. But we hire a lot of professionals. Like a lot of my classmates in my academy were 20-year veterans in Detroit detectives, Chicago homicide detectives. They might have been postal supervisors for 15 years, so they know the ins and outs of the post office. We're not typically just hiring someone who just got out of college and doesn't really have any experience. So they treat us like professionals, and most of us hopefully acted like professionals. And it was basically, we had the latitude to pick and choose what we did.
Before I ask you another question about your career, how are the postal inspectors, are you guys on a GS scale? And for the audience, GS scale is, I don't know, general schedule, and DEA, FBI, Customs, Homeland Security. So you guys are on that. Give me an idea, like when you started, and what's a journeyman postal inspector level at GS set?
So when I started, so it's called ISLE, Inspection Service Law Enforcement Pay, because the post office doesn't have any way. Post office pays through postal system, and they don't have any way to get on the GS schedule, so they just match it. So they call it ISLE. Okay. So our promotions are the same. We get the step increases the same. So it's whatever, it's 5 to 13 for the journeyman, and then the 14 is the supervisor, and the 15
so
is the
same
exact as everybody else. Okay. The only difference is that as we start, now when I started, it was you were going to be a 7 or a 9, right? But I was already a 9 in the Border Patrol, so they actually started me as a 10. Now, I think they just start everyone as a 10.
Interesting.
So you're a 10 for 2, and then you promote to an 11 and do it a year, and then you're 12 for a year or 2, and then 13 up to 13-10 for the journeymans. And then obviously if you promote, you go to the 14 scale.
Got it.
So basically we hire pretty high. Because of that, we can be a little choosy, because in inspection, postal inspector class is only 26 bodies. Let's start with 26, and they might only run 3 or 4 classes a year. It's a lot. So when I was recruiting and helping with that process, we would have like 4,000 applications for 26 positions.
Well, not only can you be choosier, but you're saying that as a general rule, most of your applicants have a lot more experience.
I mean, you'll get some people just get up in the middle and like, oh, I'm going to be a postal inspector, but they don't qualify right off, right? They don't have the things. But the ones that actually have the stuff behind them, I mean, we get some really good applicants, and then what happens is we go through what we call an assessment center. So they actually go to Potomac, and they bring in inspectors or inspector bosses, or sometimes just journeyman SMEs, special people who have special expertise, and actually do a panel. It's kind of like going to America's Got Talent, and they put you in a room and scenario with other candidates, and they watch you all day, how you act. They'll give you tasks to do, and hey, go interview this guy about a mail theft and see how they handle that. And these inspectors sit there and go, yes, yes, no, no, buzzer, no, out, and that's kind of how you get selected. It's actually a tryout.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. So it's not, they see what there is on paper, but then they bring the candidate in for a day and go, let's see what this person's really like.
Man, that seems like a really
lot. It's very intensive and takes a long time.
But it seems like it'd be a very good way to test out who people are without just going in and sitting down for an interview the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
No, it's an all-day deal. Specific tasks that are set up to test certain aspects of a person's personality. They hire actors to come in and be a little bravo with them. Like, yeah, I don't have to talk to you to see how they react, if they can have the officer presence, if they have that all, even if they haven't been in law enforcement before, but can they handle themselves competently and stuff. And I think it was great. I loved it. A lot of people don't make it through, though. And like I said, there's not a very high pass rate.
Okay, Darin. So you're in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then your second assignment isn't Boise; it's actually in DC.
Yep.
What are you doing in DC? We talked about you. Well, you and I talked about this beforehand, but you're on for lack of a better term, I think you're on a specialized task force because something's going on in DC.
Right. So I'm sitting in my office one day. I've been in San Juan about 8 months. And boss in the corner, he's the assistant inspector in charge. Hey, can you come to my office? Okay, so I walk down there and he's like, don't you have a degree in like forensics or something? And I'm like, yeah, I have a degree in forensics. He goes, you want to go to DC? So this is right after 9/11. So this is in 2002. 9/11 had happened and the Anthrax letters had been mailed. And we had an Anthrax, it's called a Anthrax task force, which was stood up by obviously the FBI and the Postal Inspection Service. So it was a task force between our two agencies to kind of figure out the whodunit on mailing these Anthrax letters. Tom Brokaw, Senator Leahy, Senator Daschle. Obviously there's 5 people who died from it and probably dozens more that were sickened. He's like, you want to go to Anthrax? I go, what do you mean? He goes, they need some people to go down there, and you got a science degree, and they need people with science backgrounds. I'm like, well, I have a science background in the education, but I'm not a lab rat. He's like, no, we just need competent investigators. You want to go to that? I'm like, sure, how long is it? 90 days. 2.5 years later.
How was that? I mean, interesting.
It was great. Yeah. It was great. I mean, I when I first got there, I learned a lot about how DC works, right? Because we were, our Frederick, Maryland is where our office was, well, where my office was, but it's stationed out of WFO, Washington Field Office, the FBI, is where the task force was originated. And man, I got to work with some cool FBI agents, some postal inspectors that I would have never otherwise met, agents from other agencies, local, state, these canines, these bloodhounds that we used to go do some sniffs on, and all the things that we did during the investigation. It was a wonderful experience, and it really broadened my horizon as to what I really like about my career and the things that I didn't want to do. I kind of realized I don't want to go to DC to live and work. That's just not how some people want to promote and go. That's great. Wasn't my thing. I always wanted to be boots on the ground and work casework. And it was great. Learned a lot about a lot, and kind of the inner workings of the bureau, which helped me because ultimately, as I came back to Boise, I was on the JTTF. And so I could understand what a 302 was, what an EC was, all the things that they're talking about. I understood the inner workings of how their agency works, and I think it was conducive to good work with the Bureau here.
How about the Anthrax task force, though? Did you end up? It's been so long ago.
Yeah.
Did you find suspects? How did that whole work out?
So our job, we had a lot of interviewing to do because Frederick, Maryland is where the United States Army Research Institute is for the Army, is where the Anthrax studies are, right? And so we had a pretty good idea that this is probably where the bug originated from, right? Our sample. And so we had all these scientists to interview and re-interview and re-interview again. And we were looking at things like who's coming in and out of suites at what time, who's working at night, who's working odd hours, who's working with who, all this. So it's such, as far as a human resources investigation is concerned, it was phenomenal. I mean, we had to have so many people going out and following people around and seeing who they're meeting. And I remember sitting out in somebody's house at night because there was somebody suggested, well, I think so and so's dating so and they're married, and so we would follow people around to see if they're actually looking at, hanging out with a person of interest that we were looking at. And so ultimately, yes, I left the task force after 2.5 years, but later on, finally, I think it was a couple years later, the indictment finally came out. Was going to come out for Mr. Bruce Ivins, who is a scientist at USAMRIID, but he ultimately succumbed to what we believe is suicide.
When you were there, Darin, did you guys have an idea that it was him?
Yes.
Okay.
We had an idea. We were looking pretty well. He had something to do with it. We were looking pretty closely at him consistently. But as you know, you have to have the burden of proof is on the government and to get there. But as far as the guys in my office and the other office, we probably all had a pretty good idea. But again, nobody wants to have egg on their face and say, hey, we think it's him, and then not.
Right.
Because that's kind of what happened with the other Mr. Hatfield. If people remember that there was a virologist that we were looking at, and eventually, I think one night the surveillance team like ran over his foot or whatever. Anyway, he won a lawsuit about the whole. He got like $5 million over the whole thing because he was not the guy.
Yeah.
And I think we were doing competent investigation and trying to eliminate him, because our job as investigators is to exonerate everyone.
Right.
If I can prove that you're not the guy, then that's great. But if I can't prove that you're not, then that's kind of where it focused. And then ultimately, Bruce Ivins was identified as the individual being responsible for those mailings, and he took his own life. So,
okay, so you're in DC for a couple of years. What brings you to Boise? What happens?
Well, I'm from Idaho. I had married a girl from Puerto Rico, and she was still finishing school and whatever. But what happened to Boise? So Rod Herr was the postal inspector here, assigned, and out of bad things, there's always silver lining, right? So Baker, Oregon, had a homicide of a postal supervisor, and Baker was closer to Boise, technically part of the Portland office, but because of the logistics and where we are located, I guess the chief, the inspection service wanted the inspector from Boise to respond immediately. Well, he happened to be in training. And I think when headquarters realized we only have one guy in Idaho, the chief said, I want another guy in Idaho. So when that came up, what happens is if you go to considered a hardship is Puerto Rico, if you go to a hardship, if an office opens up and you're close to getting your move, because I was getting to that time after 4 or 5 years, you get to raise your hand and say, I want that spot. So you jump ahead of the line. And so it's usually based on seniority, but you jump ahead of the senior guys because you took the hardship. And so I raised my hand and I got that job, got that position. And sad story. Carrier was having a bad day. Postmaster told him, you're going to have to work overtime or whatever. He's like, I'm not doing that. He goes home. He grabs a gun, jumps in his postal vehicle, drives back. He walks in the post office. Hey, where's the postmaster? One of the clerks says, he walked across to the bank to get some change or whatever, for the till. Okay, so he goes and jumps in his vehicle, and as he's leaving the parking lot, his supervisor, she's coming back from lunch, and he's like, she'll do. So he runs her over with the postal vehicle, and then she's kind of crawling away. He shoots her.
And he's just pissed because he has to work overtime?
There's something wrong with that guy. He shoots her, unloads a gun, and sits there on the curb and waits for the cops to show up. And so they had called and wanted Inspector Herr to go over there and initiate the investigation because it's at the post office, and Inspector Herr wasn't there. He was at training, and so the chief's like, I need another guy in Idaho. And so that's when the opening came up, and I'm like, I'll go back home.
Darin, we always hear stories about, postal inspectors, but postal people going postal and all this other stuff. Was that, is that just a fallacy? Is that just overblown?
Well, where going postal came from is, back in the 80s. So like in San Diego, for example, there was a carrier at a McDonald's who shot some people there, after work. I think he was actually in his uniform. Then I believe it was in Oklahoma or Tennessee somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. There was a postal shooting at a post office there where there were a few homicides. And so there were some other incidents at the post office with postal employees or the post office. So what happens is the Johnny Carsons and the David Lettermans start with the going postal on late night, and that's where that was coined. And we've just never been able to shake it. It just is what it is. We hire a lot of veterans. We hire a lot of people that, maybe have some, have a past, maybe, whatever. And, everybody just knows, either you love your postman, I think, or you hate him, in my experience. Like, you're sicking your dog on him, or you're giving him cookies at Christmas, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Darin, you get here in Idaho. What are you working on?
Oh, man, I get here, and I sit down with Rod, and I'm like, what are we working? He's like, everything. Like, what? He's like, I've got, we got employees stealing. That used to be it was called internal crimes, and that used to be one of our bread and butters internal mail theft by employees, somebody stealing packages, somebody slicing letters open and taking the cash that grandma sent in a greeting card, or gift cards or whatever, credit cards, all that. And then about the time I left, was leaving San Juan, the postal OIG started up, Office of Inspector General, and they took all of that. So they took, because we would also work fraudulent workman's compensation claims. A carrier says he fell down on the ice, hurt his back, can't walk, but he rides the rodeo on the weekends, and he's got another job riffing houses. Well, that's a fraudulent workman's compensation claim. We would work that too. Postal OIG took that. So would they leave us? All the cop stuff, all the knuckle dragger stuff. So drugs, assaults and threats, burglaries, frauds, swindles, extortions, you name it. Anything that had to do with the post office, child exploitation, child pornography, that was our bread and butter. And he worked, he had a finger in a pie with all that stuff. And so I just came in and said, well, how do we make it more robust? He's like, well, there's two of us now. Now let's make it better so we can just do more. So that I was able to go out and, sometimes he just couldn't get to Eastern Idaho and work with the agents in Eastern Idaho. I'd go out to Eastern Idaho. I'm from Southern Idaho, Burley. I would go up and spend a couple days with the Pocatello PD or Idaho Falls PD or Bannock County. And
Man, but two of you guys,
for that whole area.
You had to have been just hammered with work, though.
Oh, and that's things, a lot of times we just couldn't get to it. Like a hard fraud, like a big corporate fraud case, we couldn't handle that, So we had fraud guys in Seattle our guys who maybe had an accounting background or whatever, and they would sit and they had analysts there to help us do the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $100 million fraud cases. They would help analyze those up there, and if it was in our territory, fine. And ultimately, we would help them get search warrants or whatever, and actually do the tactical entries or whatever, search warrants, whatever we needed to do, but. For the most part, it was kind of just the quick and dirty cases as much as we could. Obviously, we try in our drug cases, as you know, we would try to develop and go up the ladder and try to find the head of the snake. But a lot of times, here in Idaho, it was just the end of the road. Like somebody's bringing in some meth. Somebody's bringing in, ultimately when I left, when I retired, it was a lot of fentanyl. Cocaine was big, obviously, in the 80s. A lot of marijuana, because a lot of our sister states around here, it's legal, so they can go into a repository and buy as much as they want and just ship it to Uncle Bob in Kuna, right? Well, Uncle Bob can't have it in Kuna. A, it's illegal in Idaho, and B, he's not supposed to mail it. So we would do a lot of controlled deliveries and stuff like that. So,
any interesting cases that you worked on in your career here in Idaho?
A lot of cool, interesting cases. I mean, we did one that was interesting and actually got a little TV time right before I retired was a guy named Frank Sweeney. Frank Sweeney and Channel 7 did an interview with us on that, but Frank Sweeney was a guy who basically stalked people through the mail. He would write postcards on a typewriter and send things like to someone's neighbor and say, hey, your neighbor next door, he's a child molester, or he's got HIV, or he'd send things to people's employers that he felt like he had a run in with some people at like a post office or a bank, and he'd figure out who they were, and he would basically harass them through the mail for years, to the point of distraction. I think one man, finally, he was so stressed out, he passed away, and I think a lot of it was the stress that he was dealing with, because he kept, even when they moved, Frank would figure out where they lived, and he would send them a postcard saying, hey, I'm watching your daughter in Seattle. She wore a green dress on Thursday at the library. Were you wearing a green dress on Thursday? Yeah. Oh. He had nothing better to do. And Frank Sweeney, if you want to Google Frank Sweeney and learn about Frank Sweeney, he'd been incarcerated several times. The postal inspectors arrested him back in the 60s or 70s for fraud. He shot a police officer with a machine gun back in New Jersey. He was under witness protection program with the marshals because he worked with the mob, and he got kicked out of that program, and somebody found out, and he got sliced from here to here in prison. He's got all this plastic surgery from the scarring, and he had rattlesnakes in his house when we went to arrest him, and he's a Nazi. He's like Adolf Hitler and all that stuff, and this guy's just a complete mess right here in Boise, Idaho. So yeah, that was one of the cases that was just very interesting.
Darin, it just flabbergasts me, the different kind of cases and how busy you must have been.
We were so busy, and it wasn't like, hey, I'm gonna work another meth case today. It's like, I'm working. Oh, what? A carrier got punched in the nose in Buell. Bye. Got to go deal with the carrier got punched. Obviously, the local police would show up and handle the initial, but he's on duty. He's a federal employee. Now I'm looking at federal charges, right? I got to go do the investigation.
Give me an idea. As busy as you are, how many hours are you working? What's a typical?
Well, it's right. It's your 40 plus your leave, right?
Right.
No, I mean, we were working 60, 70 hours in the travel. I mean, we were running through tires, driving back and forth all over the state.
So that, I mean, and you're talking about not just from the beginning of your career, you're talking about all the way to the end.
All the way to the end, especially in this assignment. You know, people promote and go live in the cubicle. Maybe they get a 40-hour week. Not the guys not boots on the ground, not the guys working the cases. You can't. Yeah. Because I could get to work at 8 a.m. and read my email about, well, I've already got it on my phone, right? I've been bing, 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 about all the things that happened the night before, put out all the fires, and then start working cases during the day. And then drug cops, they don't start till 3 or 4 at night. So they're calling me at night going, hey, what do you know about this address? What do you know about this address? 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Hey, we think this guy's might be getting a package tomorrow. Okay, Mike, I'll watch the house, and watch the address. And sure enough, a couple days later, there's an express mail coming for that address. Put a warrant on it. Yeah, it's a couple ounces of heroin or whatever. And so let's go do that. It's just constant. It was just constant. But good work.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like super fun.
Super fun, yeah.
Okay, so with that being said, with as many hours as you worked throughout your career, do you think being in your job affected your family?
I think yes, but to my wife at the time, we're divorced now, but to give her credit, she was very supportive. She understood kind of what she married into, and when my kids came along, she was very good to just kind of support me and allow me or help me do what I needed to do.
Did you get married early on in your career?
No. I got early on, I guess, in my career as a postal inspector. I was 32.
Early on in your postal career.
Yeah. I'd already been an inspector for about 2 years before I met her. So, I guess 4 years into it. Yeah. I got married in the middle of Anthrax.
Yeah. So I ask that because starting in the beginning of your career and understanding what you do is a lot more than 10 years later where you get together and she's like, holy crap, what are all these hours you're working?
I mean, I think it's helpful if people really, any advice I could give is your potential spouse needs to really understand who you are, what you do, and that the job's not a job, it's kind of a lifestyle. The cell phone never goes off, especially in the type of job that we did. We were always on duty. There was no other duty officer. If somebody got hurt in the middle of the night, because the post office, where's all the mail processed? At night. Okay? So if a couple employees have a tiff or get in a fist fight at the processing plant, they're calling us at 3 a.m. because they started at 11, right? Yeah. So it's 24/7. And she early on figured that out and was I gotta be honest and totally give her the credit that she was very supportive. And a lot of times it was, hey, I'm gonna go to Eastern Idaho. How long? I don't know, maybe 3 nights, however long the case takes. Because you got to drive there. It takes you 6-7 hours. And then you got to work the case. And then if you arrest somebody, you got to get them into court and do the initials and then come back. And we transported our own prisoners. The marshals didn't have any, but we did all that. Right. Yeah. So,
how about with your kids? How about with your kids?
So my kids were younger as I was starting out here. It took us a little while to get that going because of some health issues, and I missed a lot of their baby years. Right. So as I got towards the end of my career, now my kids are 9 and 12, 13. I have 2. And I'm like, hey, what a cool time, because now I'm 50 years old and I can retire and I can spend time with preteens and teenage kids, whereas a lot of parents never get that opportunity. Yeah. So I knew eventually in my mind that because I had to sacrifice the time early on, I would eventually be able to spend more time with my children because of the way the retirement structure is. And that's been wonderful.
Yeah. How about from the time that you started with Border Patrol until now, do you think your views on people changed at all?
Well, we're always kind of the jaded cop, aren't we? I think we are a little more aware of the human element. I've sat in some interviews with victims and listened to what happened to them. I've sat in interviews with the subjects, the offenders, and talked about what they're doing, why they do it, what motivates them to commit crime or to victimize other people. And you just get a really good sense of humanity. And I think what helps, and a lot of people, I think that could be a detriment. For me, it was kind of a strength in that you kind of get an idea of like what other people are thinking. And you can't paint with a wide brush because everybody's an individual, but you can kind of get an idea of things to look for. And I think my faith has helped me a lot in that, like, I think a lot of people could say, oh, the world's just a bunch of idiots and everybody sucks and it's the us and them, it's the cops and everybody else. It's not really that way. I think people are inherently good, but people make bad decisions.
Yeah. And
that's what law enforcement's there. If you're going to be a professional law enforcement officer, it's there to administer justice, but also know where to insert mercy and to move people along, because sometimes people just make a mistake, But the people that are consistently doing bad things, then there's places they need to go, and we call them prisons or worse, right? But if you let it get to you, you can't. That's where a lot of my colleagues, I think, have chosen to do certain things and manage it in ways that aren't healthy. Alcohol, overworking or not working, or when they retire, they do things that maybe aren't so healthy for them. And that hurts my heart. I think to have a good perspective of that people are inherently good and sometimes make decisions, and then there are people who make bad choices. But to realize that there's not a lot you can do about that as an investigator, as an officer. You're just there to be the consequence and kind of push it along. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So would you say
don't internalize it?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's exactly what I was going to ask you. So you're talking about other coworkers and stuff, kind of making bad choices, getting alcohol or whatever else. But
I'm not against drinking. I'm saying I'm against people abusing themselves.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, why do you think? Was it your faith? Why do you think that you didn't succumb to some of these other pressures that these other guys did?
I think it all comes with faith, perspective, and dignity. If you can hold on to whatever your faith is and have a perspective of people and maintain your dignity at all times, then you win the battle. Because there's always going to be negativity. There's going to be negativity in your marriage. Every marriage has its ups and downs. Unfortunately, mine hasn't lasted, and we're amicable and we're working through that. But I don't think a lot of it had to do with the work so much. Maybe we could have a longer discussion. But the thing is that it's all perspective and how you process the negativity, because there's always going to be negativity. So if you wake up in the morning expecting, not being a pessimist, but just expecting, there's going to be pushback, there's going to be negativity, and this is how are you going to deal with it. It's all in how we deal with it. And I think there's a lot of exercises in mindfulness, meditation, exercise, all cool things that we can do. But I think a lot of times people just take the easy route and default to certain things that aren't healthy for them. And it doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make them weaker. It just makes them distracted. And when we get distracted, then we kind of forget about ourselves. We got to remember that if you can't take care of number one, you're not going to be able to help anybody else out.
Yeah.
And I've kind of always lived that through my career, and then now my post-career, and in my social and personal relationships.
Good.
So, yeah, that's how I manage.
Darin, I really appreciate the interview.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.